And now, ladies and gentlemen, the question that I would like to wind up on is, where does all of this leave NATO? We all know from recent history that politically motivated cyber assaults can take a variety of forms and range in their sophistication and in their targets. Since those attacks, a number of countries have revised their cyber strategies and begun to emphasize the need for cooperation as a part of an effective cyber defense. Article 5, that great article. Article 5 provides the ultimate mechanism of international protection in the case of an armed attack against a NATO nation. Recent cyber incidents have, at least in the opinions of decision makers, not yet reached the threshold of an armed attack. But they remain a great concern to the international community. In other words, they have been a serious problem, but in terms of damage done, not yet equivalent to a more conventional attack. But we need to think about these issues, and I hope some of the legal philosophers out there among you do, because an electrical grid taken out by a missile, or an electrical grid taken out by a malevolent virus, remains an electrical grid taken out. One has a big bang, the other one just silently goes out. One is clearly an act of war. One, well, it's dubious. And then, of course, we can look at the intermediate step. What about an EMT pulse? A tactical nuclear weapon that doesn't do anything else other than knock out all of your electronic equipment. That probably is an act of war. But a cyber attack that does the same thing, that yet is not. We need to think about these things fairly deeply, I would suggest. While creating cyber Article 5 preparedness, which is becoming NATO's niche in the global cybersecurity agenda, as opposed to, unfortunately, the European Union or the Council of Europe, it is important to see collective defense as a part of cyber deterrence in a wider sense, involving law enforcement, information infrastructure providers, and information society stakeholders. Thus, in questions related to international peace and friendly relations in the cyber domain, the implementation of Article 5 is tightly related to how nations will perform on Article 4 preparedness. That is, general cooperation in combating cybercrime, exchanging information about threats and defenses. Collective defense will reside, of course, on individual defense, but individual defenses by country, organizations, other entities, needs to be coordinated and concerted to avoid legal gray areas that allow evildoers, as in the case of so-called patriotic hackers or outright espionage, to escape legal continuity, which is the case today. Collective defense mechanisms cannot be called in as a correction of mistakes or lack of preparation on a national level. Thus, every nation needs to consider its part in cybersecurity law and policy, potentially leading to international developments in this field. In this regard, implementation of Article 5 will be closely related to implementation of Article 4, which, if you don't know NATO jargon, means that you need to talk about these things beforehand. Once a cyber conflict actually crosses the Article 5 threshold, and I should point out that we don't need sophisticated predictions on when that is, when it happens, we will know it's happened, just like Stuart Potter said about pornography. When he can't define it, but when he sees it, he knows it. So too with a cyber attack. We will know it when it happens, but we can't predict right now what it will look like. The legal, and we will also discover that the legal and policy mechanisms that foster Article 4 cooperation will form the key basis for a coordinated response when it comes to Article 5. This is not to say that NATO and ally nations need not think about how to implement Article 5. It is to say, though, that the threshold of involving NATO is what is it will depend on the homework that a country has done beforehand, before something happens. But because of the nature of information architecture, militaries, in the case of what we deem to be an Article 5 issue, militaries will have limited capabilities in providing effective measures of response, especially where the targets include private and critical infrastructure or potential dual-use objects. Therefore, Article 5 preparedness starts with Article 4 preparedness, determining what potential responses can be taken within a country and between countries, what is the balance between military and other types of involvement in conflict resolution. Furthermore, issues such as proportionality of response, consensus of the allies as regards to what consists appropriate severity for NATO to take any action, and what type of force and action will be engaged, all need to be considered. Not to mention the issue that NATO already had to grapple with in the post-9/11 world. Who is responsible? How do we determine who is responsible? Because as you know, in the cyber world, the fact that someone has mounted a DDoS attack that comes from Arizona, Uruguay, and Singapore doesn't mean that it started in Uruguay, Singapore, or Arizona. And what do we do when there is disagreement within NATO about responsibility, as we imagine there might well be? Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to thank the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence for organizing this event, giving me the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, and to welcome you in Tallinn and Estonia, the home not only of the God-given Danish flag, but also, and not incidentally, the home of Skype, the first online e-elections, and equally unincidentally, the first documented cyber attacks against a sovereign nation. Thank you for your attention.